with the labs, converting music creators every single day. We just got through presenting at Revolt Summit this past weekend. We're getting ready and ramping up for A3C in October. We'll be performing a live demo there and converting more users into our platform. And then we also recently inked a larger contract, and I'm not able to say the name, but I will say that it's an actual movie production studio that is going to be using the labs as a part of their workflow to protect all of their intellectual property for their films and the music that is used in those films. So, we're really making some headway, and, have a lot of people and companies that have been interested in, we've been doing meetings and raising capital and all that stuff for the last 2 years. But, we're really finally starting to see, revenue increasing, and a lot of users are really starting to understand the platform.
So one question I do know the listening audience would want to know is, how did you come into the placements with some of the bigger names like, the Whitney Houston and Keisha Cole and Monica? Like, how did those placements happen?
Okay, well, I'll first start off with the Whitney Houston placement. I talk about this a lot, so I kind of feel like I repeat myself, but I know your audience is a newer audience. So, this situation is this was my introduction into the business, and it wasn't really nice. It wasn't at all, Amari. It wasn't a pleasant experience. But basically, I was an independent artist, and I was working in Houston, my hometown, Houston, Texas, as an indie artist, and I was signed with an indie label in Houston. Things did not go well. We parted ways, and I left the label and started my freshman year in college at Texas Southern University. I just decided that, what I was aligned with really wasn't serving me, and I needed to just make sure I go to college and finish school like my mom wanted me to do. So I started college, and the second semester of my freshman year, my mom calls and says that Whitney Houston is on the radio singing my song. And I was like, huh? And she was like, yeah, that song you wrote last year, Whitney is on the radio right now singing your song. Can you get in touch with that company that you were signed to? Because something is going on. You need to get on top of it. So after doing extensive research, Omari, they actually sold my song to Whitney Houston. And they didn't know that I owned the original copyright for the song.
Wow.
And so that was my intro into the business. I had to track down the CEO. I had to track down a producer and some friends and, just try to get to the bottom of it. Like, how could you guys let this happen? I'm literally right around the corner from y'all, from where their studio was. My university is like a couple of blocks up. Like, I wasn't too hard to find. You could have just reached out and called me and said, hey, we got this opportunity, but they didn't know that I own the copyright, and they probably were just moving off the strength that we're the record label, we bought the rights to it. But again, I was a step ahead of them, because when I left the label, I had copywritten all of my work. And so what ended up happening was we got in touch with the team over at Arista, and they were like, oh my God, we have to resolve this now, because this is her first single. It was very controversial because she was going through a lot. And of course, she is Whitney Houston. She's the voice. So it's kind of like, we don't need anything slowing this process down, because we have other singles that we need to release. What do we need to do to negotiate so that, you don't put this song on hold and, have all kind of disputes out there to where no one gets paid. And so I was able to leverage and negotiate my publishing split, a fair share, with Whitney as well as the record label, to make sure that I was included on the future royalties. And so those royalties would take care of me and my family for the rest of our lives, as long as people are loving Whitney, right? And as long as her songs are being used, and as long as her catalog is being published, produced, and licensed. And so after that opportunity afforded me to get a major publishing deal with EMI Music Publishing under the leadership of Big John Platt, who is like one of the biggest publishers in the world, especially in the urban community. I mean, he's just been behind some of the biggest acts from Jay-Z, Beyonce, Kanye, Alicia Keys, Pharrell, Tim, like the list just goes on and on. And so I got signed to him by the time I was 19. And I just stayed on top of my songwriting, but I still was in college because I promised my mom that I would finish school. Well, while I'm in college, I'm still working and going actively to studios and traveling and going to LA and New York and, coming back and forth from Atlanta and Miami and so forth. And then by the time I got out of college, which was in 2006, I'm sorry, that was 6 years later. I then moved to Atlanta. And I started writing more songs, and then I was called to actually come to LA for like 2 weeks and work with Soul Shock and Carlin. And they're like behind Toni Braxton, Tupac, Usher, Christina Aguilera. Like they're like two Dutch guys who really like, were a part of the movement of music along with, Rodney Jerkins, the Rodney Jerkins era and so forth. They were all out around at the same time. And I worked with them for about 2 weeks, and we did this record. Out of those 2 weeks, I did about 12 records. And I ended up doing my last and final song of my trip. And they were like, oh my God, this could be incredible. This could be great for Brandy. We're going to get it cut and get it demoed and, find someone who sounds just like Brandy and get it sold to her. And the project ended up passing on Brandy because I think she had some other issues going on. But Keisha Cole actually was introduced to the song through Big John Platt, and Ron Fair, which was her executive at the time, heard the song and loved it and had her to cut the record, and he also reproduced it and added orchestra and strings. So that song is called Falling Out. The Whitney song went platinum, and Falling Out also, her album on Keisha Cole's album also went platinum. The Just Like You project, that went platinum. And so, yeah, like out of the door, I'm like, coming into the game, really about to lose my publishing, but then ended up with 2 platinum albums within like the next 6 years. It was interesting. It was interesting. It couldn't be anybody but God, right? So.
Yeah, it's a wild story. And for reference, the Whitney Houston song, was that her comeback single? The I Look to You, wasn't that the song?
No, that was the final album.
Okay.
So this was the album before that. I'm sorry, I didn't mention it. It was called, the name of the song was called What You Looking At, and it was on the Just Whitney album.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, and I think that came out in 2002, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
Yeah, so yeah, those 2 singles. Keisha Cole's album got nominated for a Grammy, so that was pretty exciting. And after that, I started placing more songs in some webisodes and TV placements, so a few shows that were on MTV and VH1, like Love and Hip Hop, and there were a few reality shows on MTV that picked up a few songs from my catalog. And then I, got some overseas placements that were pretty interesting of songs that never came out over here in the United States and were never really popular, but did well overseas. And then also SWV were working on their comeback album. And I ended up submitting some songs with some other producers in Miami who were also signed to EMI. And, we just started building catalog from there. And SWV, when they signed to, I think they were with Mass Appeal, they actually picked up 2 singles of mine for their first and their second comeback album. So that was pretty cool. And they also used the songs in their reality shows that were on WeTV. So I saw, income and royalties from, television money. And television money, I don't know if anybody's told you, but it's definitely good. Like it pays pretty well because, some of the shows get syndicated and, next thing you know, you're like, oh, I got a royalty check. Wow, this is interesting. I didn't even see this when it aired again, Yeah,
there's been a couple people on the show that, talk about the TV placement. So,
yeah.
The list, go ahead.
No, and then I was just saying, I did also work with Chameleonaire on a few projects, Hometown. We're both from H-Town, and we, built catalog together as well. In addition to that, I worked with Rotimi when he was signed to G Unit and got a placement on one of his projects that came out There's another guy by the name of Malachi who was signed to Universal Motown. Not sure if he's still there, but I got a placement on that. And then also there's a country group out in Nashville called Love and Theft. And they were I got placed on their project last year. But the funny thing is we wrote the song like 5 years ago. And and so they end up winning like a CMA or not. I don't think they won. I think they got nominated for like a CMA like a few years back. And when I initially met them, we were just writing as songwriters as a part of EMI because Big John would throw these huge writer conferences and we would all just, you know, be shacked up in different studios working. And so we wrote that song about 5 years ago. And then once they got their deal after being nominated and getting all these different, you know, accolades under their belt, they were like, hey, Tami, we want to use this song. And so, you know, I was like, wow, I have a country placement. So that happened last year. And then Monica also, she released her Code Red album, which was her last album under RCA. And I wrote this huge record alongside Fat Boy and Natazio, another songwriter that I've been friends with for a while, called Anchor. And so, you know, those were my placements. And I mean, that actual song was written for Usher and Usher passed on it, you know, but, you know, great songs always find a home. That's what I always say.
Absolutely. So the next section, we usually go over everybody's journey in the music business. You kind of went over yours, but we can go back even further to what first got you started with music. Like, how did you get into songwriting?
Well, I come from a musical family. My mom, she sang a lot in high school. My dad is a great singer as well. He's also a minister, but he also plays the hell out of a bass guitar. And so I've just been around music all my life. And I was always the one performing in talent shows and singing at the different recitals and, you know, singing in chorus and performing. And I was a member of a girl group with Brooke Valentine back in the day when we were in Houston. So I just knew that singing and showmanship, you know, performance, that was my thing. But once we started actually working and recording an album, I didn't know any songwriters who wrote R&B in Houston. You know, at least not the type of R&B that I listened to. And at that time, I was growing up listening to, you know, Whitney, of course, Anita, of course. But also when I got older, there was Brandy, Monica, Aaliyah, Destiny's Child, even Mary J. Blige. I mean, she was really like my whole middle school. It was just all about Mary J. And then Faith Evans and Deborah Cox and, you know, all of those great singers. Remember at the time where it was just so many R&B singers in the industry all out at the same time. And there wasn't like a competition on, you know, whose fans are better and who is the better singer.
Right.
That was just a great time in music because you just had so much to choose from and to listen to, from your classic stuff like your Aretha and your Patti and your Anita Baker, your Regina Belle, you know, all the way up into, you know, like I was saying, your Mary J. Blige, your Faith Evans, your Deborah Cox, and, you know, so many, Toni Braxton, you know, like that was just a great era. And so I grew up listening to all of that and it just influenced me, but I just didn't know anybody in Houston that wrote those types of songs for R&B. And I did study. I was the one that would be excited every time albums come out and I would read the credits. So, you know, of course, I'm looking at all the work that L.A. Reid and Babyface is doing and Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. Of course, growing up listening to Janet and the whole Jackson catalog, really, you know, just being a huge fan of the Jacksons and, of course, Michael. But I just had to start implementing writing on my own. And so I remember writing my first song at like 15 years old. I can't remember what it was, but I knew that I was on to something. But it wasn't until I got with the girl group and we were actually put on the spot in the studio to just start writing and building. That was when I kind of knew I had that itch to not only be an artist, a singer, songwriter, a singer and a rapper, because I did the dancing and the singing and the rapping, but I also was writing our songs for us. And, you know, the producer actually liked it. You know, we collaborated on a few other things as well to finish the project. And we finished our album in like 6 weeks and, you know, it was mixed and mastered and ready to go, you know. And so things didn't work out with the girl group, but, you know, that was kind of like my boot camp. You know, it prepped me for becoming a solo artist and, you know, ultimately that's, you know, how I got signed with the indie label, and, you know, the rest is history.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So it sounds like you definitely had a very unique journey. Like you worn a lot of hats in your music career, but looking towards the future,